As I continue on my journey seeking ways in which men deal with their emotions, this afternoon I'm joined with two psychologists, Mr. Nobie and Mrs. McKenzie. Mrs. McKenzie, I am really trying to discover, how does a man deal with emotions? What is the first thing that comes to a woman's mind when she hears a man and his emotions?
I think for me it would really depend on the emotion that we're talking about, because I think men versus women have been socialized very differently, and what we've come to learn about how we express, how we experience our emotions is completely different. So I would say, if you ask me about anger and what word comes to mind when I think about a man and his anger, I would say freedom. But if you ask me about sadness and how men experience and express sadness, I would say restricted. So it really depends on the emotion that we're talking about that is at play, if you understand what I'm saying.
I mean, you said anger, and the first one that came to my mind was aggression. But you said freedom.
Well, freedom in the way that men express anger versus how women express anger. Let me give you an example. If you have two people working in the same environment, same office space, so a man versus a woman, and they're both in the role of a supervisor or manager, and that man is expressing his anger or his discontent with what's going on in the office, what words might come to mind? Maybe he's upset, or maybe he's being arrogant. So even the emotion words that you would use might be different. Think of a woman. A woman is expressing that same anger or discontent. Words like she's being B word, I can't even say it, but the B word might come to mind. She's being aggressive, she's being emotional, that kind of, she's being naggy. So even the emotion language that we use for men versus women and how we socialize men versus women by the language that we use is very different.
So, do you believe that society has created the structure in which a man finds it comfortable to express himself?
I would say, especially when it comes to anger, that they can be free in expressing that emotion. They could show outward aggression, verbal aggression, and it's not really right per se, but their limits are still a little broader than a woman expressing that same emotion, for example. But when it comes to something like sadness or more lovey-dovey, any kind of emotion that you could describe as like sappy or emotional or girly, that kind of thing, men are more limited, or they're more boxed in terms of how freely they're able to express that.
Mr. Nabi, coming from a man's perspective, how true is that?
I think Ms. McKenzie has a really great point in that, and in my view, in my opinion, in my experience, it is kind of a twinning of something that happens on a global level. So oftentimes we find that those things that she talked about hold true globally. So men across the world kind of socialize, okay, it's okay to be angry and express that anger, and it's not as okay to feel sad or to feel anxious. But for us in the Caribbean, in Trinidad, it's also something that's cultural. And whether that stems from history, from whatever you want to look at in the past that's happened, those kinds of things are twinned in a way, so it makes it a lot more complex.
Because after spending 9 years in New York, it's normal for me to see a white male be very expressive. Like, it's normal.
Right.
It's more acceptable. At first, I thought they were soft, normal Caribbean attachment we put to men who are very in tune with their emotions. But after a while, I recognized, honestly, it takes somebody who's comfortable with himself to be able to tap into those emotions and freely express it. So most times I wonder if we are doing more harm than good by instilling in our little boys, be a man, don't cry, big it weighs nothing to me, but yet still women and men will rear their children into believing, especially their boy children, into believing that that's perfectly fine, that's perfectly normal. And here we are, we will have a 34-year-old who never had that affection from his father, and it damages him without him even knowing. So my question is, how do we shift the mental mindsets of us as Caribbean women, Caribbean men, Caribbean grandmothers, or even grandfathers who have been brought up in an era where a man is described as providing for the home.
So I think you raise a really good point there in terms of the ethnic differences. So white man versus a black man expressing their emotions and how they go about doing that. I mean, we know that we have a legacy of slavery. We have a legacy of intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
I mean, we still in some ways living in this colonized mindset.
Yes.
And I think, during the times of slavery, we weren't able to express our emotions. We lived during a time of trauma where we were beaten down and told that we have to keep it in, because there was no time to think about or process how you were feeling to deal with that. So those slaves would have passed that down to their children. Their children passed that down to their children, and so on and so forth. And we now live in a society that values resilience so much. We think resilience means that you have to stuff everything down,
Yes.
and you can't be open or expressive about what you feel because it is a sign of weakness. And to be honest with you, I do think that mindset is slowly changing, maybe because of access to the internet, access to things on a global scale. We see a different way of doing things, whether through TV, you learn certain messages growing up, you're watching Sesame Street, they talk about how, you express your emotions. So if that's what you grew up on, especially as millennials, we might have a slightly different mindset, or we might be a little more open or free, all of us, in terms of how we express our emotions. But to say that a major shift has happened, I still think a lot of us are trapped in that colonized mindset.
What is, from your experiences, what is the ratio of men to women when it comes to therapy?
In my experience so far working in private practice, I have thus far only seen males, so that's an interesting
Really?
side of things. Yeah, it's just kind of worked out that way. But traditionally, working in an administrative position in private agencies in the past, it tends to be more skewed towards women. So women coming in for issues, women coming in. You would still have males coming in, and it's at this point kind of still skewed towards females, as far as I can tell. I could be wrong, statistically, numbers speaking. But I think Ms. McKenzie was making a really great point there, coming down to the end, because I think as each generation sort of comes into its own,
Right.
there's a little bit more, so there's a bit more of a platform that they stand on in terms of emotional awareness and emotional intelligence and knowledge that could kind of be projected into the future, so that by the time they get to, adulthood and awareness and that sort of thing, they have a bit more to work with. So it's slowly changing. We're kind of on the upward trajectory, but there's still a lot of groundwork to do.
So, am I to believe that a man who is emotionless, quote unquote emotionless, let me say it correctly, who seems very hard, very unperturbed by physical or emotional interaction with the other sex, is there a reason why he is how he is, or do they just happen to be like that? You understand what I'm asking, right?
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I think that, I have clients who've come into my practice that's actually their story. And for a lot of them, they've been through so much trauma in their life. Whether it is that they were raised in a broken home, they were raised with a father who is absent, to teach them, how to do things and how to be and how to express themselves, or just the lack of love that they receive from a father figure or even a mother figure because they weren't around. It makes it more difficult for men to be able to express the way that they feel, even more so. They push those emotions down because they never had someone who taught them, that it's okay to talk to mom or talk to dad about the way that you feel. It's okay to feel sad. It's okay to feel angry, because all our emotions signal to us that some things are amiss, that we need to rectify. So I do have men coming into my office who that's a struggle for, and I find a lot of the time I end up filling that role as a parent in their lives to, kind of start building up their self-confidence to make them, more free in expressing the way that they feel.
Most times, you will hear a man speaking of a woman insecurities and wanting to be in a relationship to gain the things that she lacks. And most times, if you hear women speak, and they come out of bad relationships, you will hear them say that, I thought he could have given me, or I thought he could have filled, or I thought he could have done this for me, not taking into consideration that you go into a relationship not trying for somebody to give you what you never have, but you go into a relationship trying to find a balance, trying to find somebody who understands that there is still that growing process in you, and I'm willing, or I'm here to go about that journey with you. But when it comes to the male species, it's kind of hard for me to identify exactly what a man looks for in a relationship, because men are not very vocal. Most times I wonder how it's easy for me to want to have a conversation with my daughter's father when something is bothering me, but he prefers to act, how to say, like you will know something is wrong with him not saying it, because his whole disposition automatically changes. But I prefer to have a conversation when he prefers to, probably if I ask him, so what are we eating today? I don't know. Mr. Nobie, why are you laughing?
I think that's a really interesting question, and you know, I guess what I'm hearing inside of it, you know, why, well, we mentioned before, it's probably cut off, why aren't men vocal?
Yes.
Right? So to answer that question, why aren't men vocal? I think that there's a lot that's kind of built into that reality, in a sense. And I've been reading a book called Real Boys, written by Dr. William Pollard. One of the things he talks about is something called the boy code, which is a very interesting concept that talks about basically sort of the unwritten, subtle rules that boys learn when they're growing up. Things like big boys don't cry, be a man, that sort of thing. That book also mentions the issue of boys' relationships with their mothers, and the whole question of the involvement of mothers in a boy's life, and if mothers are too involved, if they're over involved, it can get, people fear that boys become too emotional, they learn too much about emotion, they become over involved, oversensitive, and it becomes, well, people become fearful of that oversensitivity
Right.
in boys, and I think that adds to this whole issue of why men aren't vocal. So if we think about the existence of that thing called the boy code, men growing into, or boys growing into adulthood, that thing carrying over, and you're saying, well, you know, I can't talk too much, I can't, you know, be sensitive, I can't have emotions, I can only be angry. If not, you know, I'm a sissy, or I'm a girl, or I'm too feminine, or whatever
Right.
the case may be. So lots of those stereotypes, and we talked about roles and socialization before. So all of those things come into play. And even sometimes just the, you know, the makeup or the development of men's personalities and psyche and that sort of thing comes into it as well, because in a way men naturally don't talk a whole lot. They don't talk, and that's part of that's part of, you know, kind of the development of men in a way. Not that it's right or wrong necessarily, we don't get into that, but it happens that that ends up being the case. So when you marry, men aren't really vocal generally, plus this fear of oversensitivity and over emotionalness, to use it that way. It becomes a bit of an issue, because, you know, how do I talk and how do I say, how do I express myself without fear of, you have to push past those boundaries and barriers, and it really takes a lot of strength and courage to be able to do that as a man.
Go
I
ahead.
actually wanted to add to that point, that whole idea of that boy code that you talk about is like, who is reinforcing that boy code? You know,
Yep.
because we as women, we want men to be more vocal. We
Yeah.
want men to
Yes.
talk to us about how they
Yes.
feel. But you have men who are pushing other men back into that
Yep.
box
Yes.
of that boy code.
Yep.
So it needs to take all men together standing up and saying, hey, no. You
Yep.
know, it's time for us to change. It's time for us to be more open about how we govern this whole what is madness, about how we express ourselves, and kind of giving each other the opportunity to be more expressive.
But
in
for
that
me,
way.
what stood out from what you were saying is the relationship between a man and his mother, because I believe she plays a significant role in the ways in which he gives and receives love. And the more a man stays connected to his mother sometimes become his fighter. She will do stuff for him. She will talk on his behalf while he stands there very quiet. Right? So here I am where it's like, I understand that people might think a man staying close with his mother will make him seem to be very feminine. But I have seen too many times that a man developing an extremely close relationship with his mother, she becomes the person that he runs to even when he becomes married. So where do you cut off that line where I have chosen a woman to be my wife, my other half, for us to build, for us to develop, for us to grow, but yet still they have in the back of their mind that, wait, I have to talk to my mother first before talking to your wife. So how do you then cut off having too much of a mother? If not, if you understand what I'm saying, in terms of that relationship, you are constantly plugged into her, but you chose to have a wife.
That's an excellent, excellent point. And I think what I'm hearing you say or ask in that statement and question is, where is the balance between my relationship with my mother and my relationship with, you know, my wife, my girlfriend, my significant other? And that's something that men have to learn to develop, and that comes into, you know, even an understanding of things like boundaries and development and where I end, because you mentioned a very significant point there that sometimes, you know, moms might be over-involved to the point where they speak on behalf of their sons and the men are there quiet. And men need to grow into an understanding of themselves. Who am I? What is my identity? I can speak for myself. I have a boundary that, yes, I love my mom. I love, you know, my aunties, my grandmothers, because it might be different for some people. At the same time, this is where, when I become a man, this is where, you know, the boundary of my individuality. In psychology, there's something called individuation, which basically speaks to, you know, individuals coming into their own, a sense of uniqueness inside of their family context. And I think that's something that needs to, you know, happen more regularly, more powerfully, more healthily inside of the family context when it comes to men and their relationships with their mothers, their aunts, their grandmothers, and that kind of thing.
You know, and to speak to that whole idea of individuation too, I think we've seen a societal shift in which we have become very individualized. We're no longer collective. We've forgotten that it takes a village to raise a child. So I think that when there are male figures absent from the home, there needs to be other men stepping up to fill in that role. You know, not necessarily to be a father, but a mentor to boys, so boys can feel more comfortable, so that they can speak up, that they feel more comfortable sharing the way that they feel, you know, and being more open with those touchy feelings.
Guys, but this is very informative. But we'll wrap up here today, and we are definitely going to have a part 2 on discovering how men deal with their emotions. My name is Tamika Castillo, and we'll see you next time.